I started doing sacred masculinity circles, giving men permission to share themselves openly and authentically. So powerful to witness the healing and the tears, the unexpressed words, the pain and the joy, the full gamut of the human experience. As men, we are put in these little boxes, taught it's not manly to cry, and real men don't have feelings. It's a recipe for disaster, having the opportunity to open up these spaces for men to feel and express. And it was like a flood of water, a flood of emotion, a flood of honesty that had been held back for so long. Being there to create some of the container and the structure around that was a blessing to see there's really something here.
Dear Family is a podcast hosted by Rachel Steinman, a writer, an educator, and a mental health advocate. And Rachel gets us up close and personal, so we feel a strong connection, familiarity, and comfort with her guests. So settle in and join us as we search for true healing and journey with Rachel and her most interesting guests.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dear Family, the podcast. I am really excited to bring you my next guest, Aubert, because he helps us imagine a world where little boys are tenderly held and their vulnerabilities and their fragility are acknowledged. And it's a world where they can cry and express their emotions and give affection and be gentle without any fear of seeming weak. Imagine a world where masculine strength and courage are defined by the ability to shed their armor and to be open to emotions and love while also being present. I really think that if little boys are raised to feel emotions, there will be less mental health disorders. And I just love this conversation I had with Aubert. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing. It means so much to me, and writing those great reviews and sharing with your friends and following me on all the social media platforms at Right Now Rachel. It means the world. And I just want to send you so much love and let you know I'm thinking of you, and you can always reach out to me. Take care and enjoy this episode. Aubert Bastiat is a father, husband, ceremonialist, and facilitator of sacred masculinity circles. He was born in Taipei to a Taiwanese mother and a white American father who was an English teacher. He was just 5 years old when his parents separated after moving to California to briefly live with his paternal grandfather. When his father left and moved to Japan, he felt abandoned. For most of his childhood, he was raised by a single mother who struggled financially to support him and his two sisters, one who would sadly die by suicide. Aubert lived a double life, the yearbook editor and in all the AP classes, while selling drugs to fuel and pay for his habit. He'd end up in jail, his life spiraling downward. An atheist on the verge of taking his own life, he prayed to God, who spoke to him. His spiritual awakening initially translated into him becoming a hermit for the next year, praying, meditating, and studying different world religions. He would rewrite the script of fatherhood in his lineage to give his young sons a new expression of masculinity, basking in the new glow of fatherhood and feeling so inspired to be the best man he could be. He's since co-founded Sacred Sons, an emerging voice in the collective movement of healthy masculinity, facilitating men's gatherings and circles to find brotherhood, wellness, connection, community, healing, and love. Welcome, Aubert. I am so happy to have you on the Dear Family podcast. You and I met through my mom, a very unlikely pair. You met my mom at the Center for Spiritual Living when you were living in the Central Coast.
Yes.
And you instinctively knew my mom was manic because you have a sister who is manic. And at that point, I think my mom was full of promises and far-fetched ideas. But regardless, you loved her like I do. And she even invited you to her 70th birthday party, which you drove down to Los Angeles for and came into my house. And here's this very handsome tall young man that's my mom's friend. And we were just so thrilled to meet you. So welcome.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with you today, Rachel. I was actually just talking to my beloved Devana about your mother, and we were just laughing about how much fun we had with her and the conversations we would have going everywhere across the universe. She's such a beautiful, kind soul, and even in her mania, was always really open to connect and share good space with.
Two kind souls found one another. Because this is a podcast called Dear Family, I always love to start by asking my guests to tell us a little bit about their family.
I grew up in a small family. For the first 5 years of my life, I was born in Taipei, Taiwan. My mother and father separated after our time in Taiwan. When I turned 5, we came to the States, lived with my grandfather on my dad's side. From 0 to 5, there's some good memories. There's also a lot of intensity. I remember a lot of fighting or disagreements. I remember one birthday in particular where I had this Mickey Mouse cake, and it was supposed to be great. What really stood out was the fighting between my mother and father. Suffice to say, there was some chaos and some unresolved issues between them and within each of them that led to it being emotionally chaotic and relationally unstable environment for us children. It was my older sister, who's 2 years older than me. I'm 36 now, and my younger sister, Shonda. It was a struggle in many ways.
Your father was a white man and spoke 5 languages, kind of a lone wolf intellect, and moved your family and your mom to America. Did your mom speak English?
She did speak English. They met in Taiwan. He was teaching English in Taiwan and spoke many languages and was pretty well traveled. Didn't really fit into the normal American mold and shunned working for the man, as he might say. Didn't agree with taxation. Really strong proponent of the laissez-faire economy, tried to live according to his ideals. I can respect him for that. And at the same time, was not ready to be a father, was not ready to show up in relationship to work through the issues between him and my mother that spilled out and impacted us kids. And they did not have the awareness to explain to us, like, this is between us. This is not you guys. We love you guys. Everything's going to be okay. But that wasn't articulated to us. It wasn't communicated to us. And so everything did not feel like it was going to be okay. There's always a sense of dread, like, oh, what's going to happen to us? It would get pretty heated. And there was a lot of fear, a lot of feelings of uncertainty. And as little children, I don't think there's anything more important than that sense of security and unconditional love that, hey, everything's going to be okay. They didn't have the capacity to communicate that. Growing up, it was really tumultuous. And we did what we could, me and my 2 sisters, to get by and make it work. And when we were in Taiwan, we had extended family, which made it a little better because we go to see our uncles and our aunts and play with our cousins. That was a little bit of a buffer to the chaos in our household, or the fighting between them. My dad would shut down, or he would escape from it at times. My mother was realizing she made the wrong choice in finding a partner to have children with. We moved to California, Orange County specifically, to live with my grandfather. That was short-lived. He was an older man, I think probably in his 70s or 80s. He was pretty old already. And that was challenging as well, because my mother would fight with my grandfather. He had some old beliefs about where women should be and how they should be operating and how they should be, basically. And there's some racist undertones in. I remember some nights, my mom just crying, and I remember her taking us all in her car. We were all buckled up at night, and mom had nowhere to go. So a sense of like, well, there's abuse and negativity in the household, and I have no one here in this country to lean on. There was a sense for my mother of being isolated and at odds with the reality of life in California, being dependent upon my father and my father's father. My father made the choice to go teach English in Japan. He got a university job and left us with my grandfather, with his dad. And so there was a running away on his part from the responsibility of fatherhood that he just didn't have the capacity to face. So we are left adrift And my mother started going to school and found her way. She has a passion for art. She was a little bit idealistic. She was like, I'm going to get an art degree and start creating art and sell it. And that didn't happen. There's a lot more struggling and seeing her stressing out. So much of my childhood was my world and my needs and my awareness of self as a growing boy was superseded by the emotional turmoil my mother was in most of our life, trying to make ends meet, fighting with my father about child support, all the things. And that made it difficult to just have a childhood. In many ways, I had my older sister play the role of mom at home and try to get us to clean up and make sure everything's done, taking on the mother role. My little sister and I would rebel. We'd team up and be like, no, you can't tell us what to do. We escaped the best we could, the family situation. My mother held a sense of resentment and hopelessness. Most of the hallmark of my childhood was life is tough. We didn't belong. We didn't have a community. We didn't have extended family. It felt very isolated. No religion. We grew up in an atheist household. My dad was a staunch atheist, and my mother was more of a humanist. She didn't have a connection to a higher power per se, but was a good person and believed in goodwill towards other humans. But yeah, it was difficult.
We're going to talk about your current family, which you are supplying the antithesis of what you grew up in with your sons. Your mom was trapped because she didn't feel like she could go back home out of shame. And you didn't have extended family and you felt isolated. And there was all this trauma from your mom raising you. And although you had a roof over your head, you did grow up in impoverished conditions. And you ended up turning to drugs as a means of coping. And you developed multiple addictions to escape.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
It started kind of young, looking for a way out. Started out with delinquent behavior, vandalism, falling into the misfits or the kids that had broken families themselves, and looking for an escape, looking for fun, looking for something that could take me away from the inner turmoil that I felt. Started out with pornography, and that was pretty young, was exposed to it in elementary school. So that was probably like the first way in. And then there was cigarettes. And then in high school, stepping into cannabis, cocaine, ecstasy, methamphetamine was a big one, and other opiates. And so was dabbling in many different things and really found my way deep into crystal addiction, which really took many years from my life, focused on the wrong thing. And it came down to running and bypassing all the trauma that I didn't have the inner capacity or external support to deal with. It was an escape. In the end, it compounded the problems within and brought them and externalized them even more. And so eventually found my way into the wrong crowds. I was using, I was selling, I was putting myself in a really risky situations, having risky sex with other women who are addicted themselves. It was a downward spiral. I lived with a lot of shame for that. I lived double life. I was working much of the time that I was also dealing and trying to keep these lives separate as much as I could, but it all collapsed. I ended up going to jail and getting arrested and charged for possessions for sales. I just remember crying, sitting in the back of that police car, feeling like my world was over. It turned out to be a first step towards recovery, a first step towards recognizing that there was something really wrong, and it was deeper than the drugs, but the drugs were the mask for that. And so ended up spending some time in Men's Central Jail in LA. I tried to fight it the best I could and ended up spending a bunch of money on criminal defense lawyers. I wasn't able to avoid that. During the course of my time in jail, it was a big wake-up call because I was in a large cell. During this time, there was actually a thing with races. There's Asian gangs and Chicano gangs. And so there's a green light on the Asian population. Supposedly, green light is like if you see someone from another race, particularly these Asian gangs, then you're supposed to attack them or assault them, no matter what the situation is. For our safety, we were put into these large cells. They weren't really safe. I saw a lot of brutality and beatings. I was around people who were looking at 25 to life for murder, and in there for so many sad and awful crimes. I could just see in talking to some of my fellow inmates that this was not the place for me. Like I didn't belong here. And I really had to take a look, like, how did I up here? Why am I in here without my freedom? Having dreams of being outside and waking up. And I'm like, I have no freedom. It's been taken from me. It was really a reality check. It was a wake up call. And I vowed to do better, and that didn't last very long. I got out and I went back into the old friends and back into drugs and started doing the same thing again. I was very disconnected from responsibility, had no respect for authorities. And at the same time, I was on probation. I was supposed to call this hotline every day to see if I was going to go get drug tested the next day. And I didn't do that for the first few months. I ended up racking demerits. And if I get enough of them, then I'm going to be sent to prison. My probation officer at the time, he was like, look, you're not a bad guy. You're not like some of these guys on my caseloads. You have a chance at changing your path. You can have a good future, but you need to stick to the program. Otherwise, I'm going to have to send you back in, and it's just going to get harder and harder for you. I took that advice and I started getting clean. By sheer will, I stopped. So I started eating better. I started working out. I started focusing on the positive things. I'd write and journal, really committed to my growth. I was committed to healing. I was committed to a better, more positive lifestyle. And so I got out of addiction and came to a point where I was feeling like I was on top of the world. I was like, okay, cool. I got this. I'm doing great. I was able to heal my body. I started weightlifting. I was young still at that point. I was 21. I got overconfident. I got cocky about where I was at and who I was becoming, and started selling cannabis again and started making some pretty good money. And through that process of not learning my lesson, I came across another instance and I ended up relapsing onto crystal. And I had more money now and more power and more coping mechanisms. And now that I looked a certain way, it almost even gave me more of a belligerence with it. I was like, I can do whatever. I didn't end up going back into jail or mess with the law, but I did end up hitting rock bottom again, where I was at the brink of suicide and felt so discombobulated and depressed and self-hatred, felt so down low. Couldn't go any lower. And that's where everything shifted.
Before we get into that shift, I want to go back a little bit and talk about something you mentioned, which was living that double life, because you're a highly intelligent person. You excelled in academics in high school. You were the yearbook editor. You were in all the AP classes. For parents listening or people that often look at some families and think, oh, this kid has everything going for him, or their family looks so picture perfect. We don't always know what's happening on the inside. And yet you were still struggling because you had all this trauma that was never dealt with. When you were finally off of drugs and were in jail, people looked to you as a spiritual guide. And once back out, you fell back into the wrong crowd and you started doing drugs again because that trauma was not dealt with. And again, that double life, you were always good at making money. You would sell things on eBay that you bought in stores, and were involved in internet marketing, and you got a job with Orange Unified working in their computer department. Clearly, you have the intelligence to be able to do that. But the drugs were masking the pain. Just as you were starting to get your life back together, you needed to move in with your mom in Anaheim Hills to help out your younger sister who was relapsing. Tell us what happened with your sister.
Throughout this whole time, I was working full-time jobs, usually in technical support or IT. And I was living that double life still that carried over from high school. My pain, trauma, and the expressions of my maladaptive coping was on one side. And then the other side was like, I'm great. I'm positive. I'm popular. I have friends. I do good things. I'm a go-getter. I was also struggling with addiction. And I had a really good job at the time. And I was living with some of my friends in a house that we rented together. It was kind of like a party atmosphere for guys, young, early 20s, feeling invincible, like we could do anything we wanted. And so we had parties and had a lot of fun. And at the same time, it wasn't really a house that was conducive to my healing and my well-being. My mother reached out one day. She was still living in the apartment that I had lived in from middle school. I was 23 at the time. She expressed that my little sister Shauna was not doing well and that she wanted us to rally and change the home environment so that she could have a more positive and healing home environment. They're living in a 2-bedroom apartment in the not so good side of town. I was like, yeah, okay, let's do this. I agreed to join forces with her and my older sister and to all move into a house together and try to start over and give her a shot at recovering. She was suffering from schizoaffective disorder, which is like a hybrid of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So it was really challenging. She was going in and out of the mental hospital. And my mother wanted to try to give her some stability. We rented a house in Anaheim Hills. And it was during that time that I was living there, I was met with not being able to stay steady. I was trying to stay clean, but I kept on relapsing and felt a lot of self-hatred and self-disgust for not being able to be better for my family. I felt a lot of shame for having to also hide that from my family. It came to the point one night where I was craving drugs. I want to go out to score. And I was really in this battle between myself of like, no, I can't go. Like, oh, like I gotta go. What else is there? Just going back and forth. It came to that point where I was so sick of it and so disgusted with myself that I decided that I had to kill myself. I said, I'm never going to get out of this. The only thing keeping me from killing myself at that point was hurting my family. I was in agony to feel so trapped. My world was so dark at the time. And it felt even exacerbated by the fact that my sister was struggling, my mother was struggling. I resolved to kill myself that night. I'm sad to leave them like this, but I can't do this anymore. I was on my bed feeling so much sadness and crying and just like, I can't believe this is how it's ending. Just a sense of disbelief. As I kind of thought about the impact that it was going to have on them and then finding my body, I got really sad and I cried out to God. And I was an atheist at the time. I did not believe in God, but I cried out and prayed. I said, God, I need to know if you're real or I'm going to kill myself. If you're real, God, then you know that I'm serious. And it was in that moment that this energy, this vibration started to fill my room. There's no way I can convey the magnitude of that experience because I've told it different times, different people in different places. But the short of it is this really rapid vibrational energy filled my room, something that I'd never felt before. It felt like a high speed vibration. It was on the outside first, and then it was on the inside of me, and it filled me. It was in that, as I acclimated to this energy, that I realized that this was God, that my prayer was answered. And as I felt this energy, I felt my heart open up. I cried out because I never felt this love. I never felt God. I never knew God was real. All these things at once of feeling my pain being taken away from me and feeling so loved and held by this force that I didn't know was real. Knowing that God was real and crying out, thank you. Thank you for saving me when I felt so worthless. And at the end that I could receive this grace and experience this miracle. Was just everything. And I made a vow and I was speaking to God, not in words, but in my feelings and thoughts. And it would respond to me and just give me this knowing. It felt like I was being held like a baby. It was like being cradled in arms of cosmic love because it was this love that was beyond words, beyond description. And it was intelligent and conscious. And it knew me through and through, in and out. And it expressed to me that it's always been here and it'll always be here no matter what. And I need to listen and I need to do better and try better and it'll never leave me. And I was just so grateful to have this grace. And I vowed, I'm like, God, like my life is yours. Like I'm here for you. This is all that matters. And the fact that this is real, I need to share this with people. I need other people to know that God is real. It gave everything meaning. Everything made sense suddenly. The burden that had felt unbearable up to that point, I just felt inspired and empowered to tackle all these different parts of my life and parts of myself that needed to come into the light, that needed to be rectified and made right. That was the beginning of my healing journey, really. I went on a journey of studying all the different world religions for a few years and doing spiritual practices. And I changed my diet. I became a vegetarian and did all these things that really supported my spiritual growth. I was meditating and praying every day for hours. I stopped watching TV and movies and reading magazines. I quit it all. No more porn, no more drugs, and no more relationships. I withdrew into myself. There's nothing more important than to know what created me, to know the source of all life. It was from that I was born again, I could say. It was still hard. There was a lot of challenges in family stuff. My little sister Shonda ended up committing suicide a year after my awakening. God actually showed me it happening in a vision that came to me one day, exactly how it happened. She ended up jumping off a building. It was devastating. The day it happened, I went to drop her off somewhere. And I remember on the ride there, something compelled me. I always talked to her, but I tried to reach her more than ever. I said, Shonda, we love you so much. We love you. Like mom loves you. I love you. Linda loves you. We all love you so much. And you're going to get through this. You're going to get through this, and we're not going to give up on you. You don't have to feel bad. You don't have to worry about it. Just trust in God. God's here. God loves you. I love you so much. And I came to tears talking to her. As I look back on it now, I understand that God was helping me express all the things that I would have regretted if I never had expressed those things to her. I was so passionately expressing our love for her. And I remember dropping her off and she said, it's okay. Everything's going to be okay. And at work that night, got the call from my mom that she had died by suicide. Both my mother and my sister lost their jobs, and I was working full time, going to school full time, and fully committed to my spiritual path. It was a very, very hard time in life. We had just moved to a new house we had bought. It was by God's grace that I was able to get through all that.
I'm so sorry about your sister. That pain stays with us and is something we have a hard time letting go, but I'm happy that you were able to tell her how much you loved her. That's a gift for you. You were going to school and you were very interested in psychology and communications and journalism.
Mm-hmm.
You transferred to Cal State Fullerton and you studied human services and counseling. And you were in a program called Character and Conflict. You had a real revelation. Tell us what that was.
I was in this program, Character and Conflict. It was basically a group leadership program for students who are interested in becoming human service professionals, mental health professionals. It was an opportunity for us to experience existential process group. They wouldn't call it therapy group for all the legal reasons, but it was pretty much a therapy group. We were practicing the theories and techniques of counseling that we were learning. It was the applied and experiential component of our academic study. And wow, that course changed my life. And God guided me there. It's funny because I was working full time and I was not going back to school yet. I remember getting this card, an ad from Lazy Boy. It was just like this joke from God to me. And I knew immediately God wanted me to do more. And so I ended up going back to school, finishing my units, transferring to Cal State Fullerton. I changed my majors twice until I ended up in human services. I had the opportunity to do this Character and Conflict program, which really revolutionized my whole worldview and tapped me into my purpose. After going through as a participant, as a member of a group led by my fellow students, supervised by these seasoned psychologists who had private practices, they had written books, really esteemed people who had created this program some 30 years ago. Gerald Corey was one of the founding members, and he'd written a lot about group therapy, just amazing humans. I had the blessing to take that with Stuart Bloom, who became one of my mentors and friends, and still to this day, really hold him in such high regard. This man was my supervisor. Most people lead groups maybe once, maybe twice, and I loved it so much that I led 3 times. I was in that program for 2 years, 1 semester as a participant and the other 3 as leads. And it was during one of the leadership opportunities that my co-leader ended up dropping out. And Stuart came to me and said, I have faith that you can do this alone, and I trust you. And his faith in me gave me the confidence to go, yes, okay, I'm going to stay the course and lead this group. It ended up being one of the most profound experiences of my life, leading this group, the cohesion that we were able to build together, the trust in me as a group facilitator, and my attunement to the greater good, and knowing how to lead with my heart and lead by example in such a way that we were able to do such powerful work together, that it really showed me that this was my life's work. I'm here to help people heal. There's nothing more important to me than being able to do this. During the course of my time as both a participant and as a leader, all the group leaders were supervised by one of the professors, and Stuart Bloom was one of mine. It was during supervision in the group, I was able to heal a lot of my own wounding around my father. He held space for me to grieve my sister, Shonda, who had died by suicide, and held space for me to work through my stuff with my father. My father was absent from my life for at least a decade. He literally disappeared from like 11 years old to 23 and came back into my life just before my awakening. Anyhow, Stuart Bloom was able to stand in and hold space for me to experience a healthy male figure, someone who loved me. I couldn't believe it at first. I couldn't believe that he really felt these things that he would express to me, like, you're a star, I love you, like, you're doing great, all these things. I kept them at arm's length and was like, yeah, you say that to everyone. But towards the end of us working together, it finally broke through and got to me, and I started believing him. And as I started believing him and letting him into my heart, it really opened the door for so much of the healing with my father to happen. I really saw him as a father figure for a time, and he really made space to have me take him off that pedestal and see him as a peer, and really expressed his faith in me and the work that I was doing with Sacred Sons, and has just been a cheerleader from day one. I'm where I'm at in many ways because of his faith in me too. I needed that. I needed that from a man that I respected. I needed someone who could see that gold in me and bring it out. I just have so much gratitude for Stuart. He's getting older and he stopped teaching a couple years ago, but he has changed so many lives.
That's so beautiful. You are modeling that same kind of behavior of believing in other men to give them the space to heal and feel good about themselves. Besides the traditional psychology, you were led down alternative paths like psychedelic medicine and shamanism and different ways of healing. Although it was not your original intention, how did you begin developing this organic following on social media surrounding consciousness gatherings and social justice?
I was in a relationship around the time I was finishing up Cal State Fullerton, and she introduced me to Instagram. I learned the healing and the power of sharing our truth with the world and not being afraid of what people are going to think. That breakthrough came in Character and Conflict, where I was given permission to share, and I shared about my sister's death and was supported. That opened the floodgates to all this repression and suppression that I had put myself in, that men don't feel and we don't express and we keep it in and we're just stoic and we're strong. It really flipped that on its head and taught me the value in being open. And so I started sharing on social media insights, quotes, photos, and that built up really organically. I would share little bits of my writing and started getting more and more feedback. There's a positive reception that was growing. I got connected to another group of people doing these free events. I was brought into it at the very beginning. I had like a 5,000 person following at the time. Some of these other people had like 50,000. In the beginning of my social media journey, it was really opportune that I got in at that time in that way. Those early days, it was so much easier to build a following, because now it's just such a saturated field. And that's great. I think it's great. And at the same time, really thank God for that blessing. It was able to create a platform of people that resonated with spirituality, with God, with social justice, healing, and then just shared myself authentically and openly about my journey and my challenges. It was really real, really authentic. I learned that in Character and Conflict. That really paved the way to putting to use some of what I've been trained to do, some of what I've studied, and the unique synthesis of the paths that I was walking and to bring them together, starting with the event organization with Cosmic Consciousness. And so we were doing those free gatherings at the park, having talks and yoga and meditation and all these different things. It was really fun. In retrospect, this golden age time where it was carefree, it wasn't about making money. It was really trusting that something new was being birthed. It felt like a renaissance of consciousness. We had traveled all around California and even to New York to do these free events. That led the way to running into the right people and making new friends in this world of self-development and healing and spirituality. I started doing sacred masculinity circles at these gatherings. There's interest. My first group was like 32 men, and then it was 64 men. Seeing all these men together and doing this work together really showed me, wow, there was a need for this. Just giving men permission to share themselves openly and authentically. It was so powerful to witness the healing and the tears, the unexpressed words, the pain and the joy, the full gamut of the human experience. As men, we are put in these little boxes and taught that it's not manly to cry, and real men don't have feelings. It's crazy the things that we learn as boys and we pick up in our environment, from our friends, from our parents, to teach us that it's not safe to feel. It's a recipe for disaster, because you have ultraviolet movies, ultraviolet video games, the glamorization of masculinity, like the hyper masculine ideal of Rambo and Rocky. There are very few real models of healthy masculinity in the media that men can look to, maybe some sports stars and whatnot, but lacking a full and robust expression of what healthy masculinity looks like. Many men oftentimes put people on pedestals that are not the best. Growing up in a generation where that was still the norm, where we were abused to a certain degree and left to fend for ourselves. And then now having the opportunity to open up these spaces for men to feel and express. And it was like a flood of water, a flood of emotion, a flood of honesty that had been held back for so long. Being there to create some of the container and the structure around that was a blessing to see there's really something here. It wasn't until 2 days after my son Kyra was born, I was leading one of those gatherings and I facilitated a men's group there, a good 60 plus men. We were healing together. We are crying together. We are laughing together. And there was genuine brotherhood that had been cultivated. And I had done that using what I had learned in the different modalities and spaces and trainings that I had done. I was by no means an expert. I didn't feel like an expert, at least, but I was able to lead in such a way that it created the conditions where men felt safe enough to feel and express their feelings openly. That gives other men permissions to do the same. This ripple effect until we're all tapped in and connected and seeing each other beyond the race, beyond the body, recognizing we have such similar experiences as men. The tears that you cry are like the tears that I cry. Really feeling that transpersonal sense of connection and brotherhood. It was after that gathering, I prayed. I said, God, if this is what you want me to commit my life to, then help me find a space where I can lead weekly men's circles. And I'll do it. Very shortly after that, my friend Franco reached out to me, expressed, hey, I got some extra studio space. If you ever want to do any of your gatherings, anything at my place. I wasn't even known for men's work at that point yet. But it was like just beginning. But he offered his space and the rest is history. I started leading weekly men's circles, super committed to it and basking in the new glow of fatherhood and feeling super inspired to be the best man that I could be, to rewrite the script of fatherhood in my lineage and to give my son Cairo a new expression of masculinity, of a man who can feel, a man who loves and expresses his love in all the ways. Of course, my dad loved me, but because of his wounds and how he was accultured, he wasn't able to communicate that in the ways that I would have been able to receive. I grew up really feeling like my dad didn't love me, and that drove so much pain and so much questioning of my own worth and my own value as a human being. I'm grateful to not perpetuate that anymore for my sons now, and to help other men deal with their shit. Basically, we got to deal with our shadows. We got to deal with our shame. We got to face these ancestral traumas that perpetuate generation after generation because we're not able to have the conversations, or we don't know how to have the conversations that are uncomfortable. They're difficult. Once we find a space that gives us permission to speak to these things that are often taboo or often in the shadows, wow, it's off to the races at that point.
3 years later, you're still running Sacred Sons and having retreats, and you just had a second son. I am so grateful to hear that there are circles like this, because I do think the toxic masculinity is toxic for men. I'm wondering if you can tell us what the father archetype is and why we need to have it return.
The mission of Sacred Sons is co-stewarding the return of the father archetype. And the father archetype speaks to the good father, the present father, the father who isn't absent, not only physically absent, but emotionally absent, because there's a lot of fathers that show up in the household, but they're blank, focused on work, not present. They're not emotionally available. This is endemic in the world of fathers going to work, fathers going to war, fathers worrying about providing for their family. For all these reasons, the father has been absent in many ways, shapes, and forms. But it also speaks to the absence of God the Father from our planet and the feelings of humanity that we've been abandoned by God the Father, that we've been abandoned by the good Father, and that now we're left on our own. We're left to toil, we're left to suffer, and we're left to struggle and praying if we're good enough. And if we show that we're worthy, then God's going to return, whether that's in the form of some Messiah or someone who's going to come and banish the sinners to hell and make this God's kingdom. This belief, it's seated within many different religions from around the world that there's going to be a return of God. And our position and our perspective has never left. That God is here, and it's our responsibility to open our hearts to listening deeply to nature, to God, to love. These are all aspects of the same thing, the same force, the same source, I guess you could say. And so really stewarding the return of the father archetype is about embodying healthy masculinity, is about embodying the good father, not only for our families, because many of the men that are in Sacred Sons aren't even fathers yet, but we all have the capacity to cultivate a relationship with this archetype, which is a long-standing energy pattern woven throughout human history of the father. Carl Jung spoke to the archetypes as these ancestral energy patterns that we can tap into. We can activate these different dormant parts of us when we tune into the father archetype or the lover archetype or whatever different archetype there is. Specifically, if you look at the ills of the world and the violence and all the harm that's being perpetrated, the truth is it's largely being perpetrated by men. The majority of violent crimes, the majority of rape, the majority of assault, the majority of all the bad shit that's happening on the planet is pretty much by the hands of men, like 9 out of 10, something like that, the vast majority. Really, it comes down to recognizing our responsibility as men to break the cycle, to do our own work, and to become really honest about how we are perpetrating violence and harm, even on a micro level, even in the form of our apathy, our lack of compassion, our irritation, our avoidance of our responsibility as men. It's a tall order, but it's much needed because we look out into the world to see right now how much the father archetype is needed, the good father, the father that's here to show up and take responsibility and lead the way into a new way of being, a new way of doing, a new way of relating. There has to be someone that breaks the cycle. We can't just keep on blaming each other and fighting with each other and expecting things to change. It's all about starting and owning and being accountable to the ways that we're out of alignment without projecting it out there on them, this person, that person, my dad. It comes down to us taking full responsibility for our life and where we're at and what we would like to see in the world. The father archetype is all about showing up as that in all of our relationships and all of the dynamics that we get to be in, that we are blessed to be in as human beings.
Stuart Bloom showed you what that father archetype is. He passed it to you, and you can pass it to your son and to your Sacred Son group. And that's how these things change. You currently live in Austin, Texas, on a 10-acre property.
Yeah, we live amongst the oaks, and it was all very aligned because of what Devana really wanted. We were doing this affirmation before we found the place that we would find a home surrounded by nature where Devana could give a natural home birth and where a family could thrive.
I want to talk about nature and that home birth because back in February, when Texas experienced the snowstorms and the power grid collapsed, Devana went into labor. I was watching some of the images on social media and going, oh my God, I didn't know this, but her first birth was an emergency C-section. And this time around, during the power outages and the water being shut off and electricity being out, she wanted to have a free birth. That means no midwife. What was it like delivering a baby during a snowstorm with no running water and the only source of heat from a wood-burning oven? It sounds like you went back in time.
Well, it was amazing. It was challenging, but it was perfect. We actually didn't lose water until the birth was done. And so we were able to fill the birth tub. The baby came, and then we lost water the next day. Nature came on the 13th and was starting to get icy, but we didn't lose everything until the next day. We lost water and power. There's rolling power outages, so the power would come in and out. But we fortunately did have that wood burning stove, which we kept running 24. And it was nice. It was like this return to the old ways, especially with the home birth. We had a radical birth keeper. It wasn't a midwife. Someone to be there and hold space and help clean up, just be this deep presence of support, this unconditional feeling of like You got this, reflecting to Devon her innate capacity. It was a beautiful blessing to experience it under those conditions. It all felt like a page out of some old story back before we had all these modern conveniences. It felt very simple. We didn't have any fear. We had a warm, cozy house. We had our family. We had food. We had everything we needed. And the birth, thank God, it did go through without any complications. That's not always the case, but Devonna had done a lot of preparation, preparing her body and her mind and her whole being to deliver this baby in as easeful and beautiful way as possible. She accomplished that. It was really a reclamation in being able to experience that together and to have the baby delivered into our hands. I never thought I'd do that. I never thought I'd receive in that way. I was thinking it was going to be a long, drawn out affair because I had heard birth takes a long time. It could even take 3 days. I have a deep trust in Devonna's wisdom. I'm here for anything she needs, but my biggest thing is just being out of the way energetically. I trusted her body. And I trusted God. I was like, this is going to unfold in the best way. And I'm going to trust it no matter what happens, whether the baby's healthy or not, it's meant to be that way. There wasn't any fear. There wasn't any anxiety. There wasn't any tension. It was just trust. What's next? Getting into that birth tub and having her deliver nature into my hands and our hands together. We caught them together. It was such a blessing to be able to experience it in this way that so many don't. It's like, wow, women have been delivering this way forever. That's why we're all here. It was only until, relatively recently that we started industrializing birth into hospitals. It was an honor to witness Devonna in her power as a woman, as a mother, and to rock it the best way possible. Very humbling, very magical. Nature's a dream baby.
For the listeners who can't see you through Zoom like I can, you just lit up with the biggest smile. And I know you love being a father. And I know that your mom, who has early onset dementia, is now living with you.
Yeah.
And you and your dad have rekindled a relationship. I'm happy for you. Sometimes it takes becoming an adult to be able to forgive and look at the past and move forward.
Thank you. Yeah, my mother's living with us. I talk to my dad on a semi-regular basis. We still have very different viewpoints, but thank you to my brothers of Sacred Sons, my co-founders, Adam and Jason, who have been there, Kevin and Neil, Marco. Some of these guys have been there with me while I've gone into some deep processes around my mother, around my father. They've been there to hold me as men and even as human beings. It's important to be able to have community and support to be able to work through some of this stuff before bringing it to our parents. Because our parents are our parents. We got to do the work to heal so that we can be free of any resentment and pain and grudges that we might hold. I had thought I was done and had forgiven my dad after working with Stuart, but it wasn't until a recent trip that I took with Devonna and Cairo to visit my dad back at the end of the year that I got to this next level of connection and forgiveness with my dad. I really felt it in my whole body. That connection, felt the desire to connect more deeply in expressing some truths that were difficult to express to him, but it was just honest.
It's a gift to yourself to be able to forgive and let those things go. I have just 2 more questions I ask all my guests. If you could write your younger 20-year-old self a Dear Aubert love letter, knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself?
Aubert, everything's going to be okay. You got so much gold within you, and you're going to touch many lives, and you just got to get through today and trust that anything that happens to you, good or bad, it's going to help you grow, help you learn how to be a man. Keep on trusting and know, above all, God is real and God loves you. Even if you don't feel it right now, one day you will feel it. And try your best to take one step at a time and know that it's all going to unfold as it's meant to. You don't have anything to worry about. You don't have anything to be afraid of. You have everything you need within you. I believe in you. I celebrate you. And I love you.
Wow, what a beautiful letter. Last question. What do you do that brings you happiness? What are your happiness habits?
Spending time in nature, actually. With my son, nature, holding him brings me a lot of joy and a lot of peace. But specifically now, I've been dropping Cairo off to his forest school every morning. And it's become a part of my weekly routines now to spend the first hour of my day in nature on a trail. I hike in to drop Cairo off with his group, And I started spending more time hiking on the way out. It's really transformed and brought me back to my heart. And that's really the key, is staying in my heart. In nature, I find my connection to God oftentimes the strongest. I'm able to listen to the birds and feel the breeze and know that God is here. God is everywhere, but it's just so much more palpable in nature. Time with good people, with my family, with community, with my brothers, with my sisters, and definitely meditating in my heart upon God, talking to God. I'm not asking God for anything. When I pray, I'm not asking God for anything. I'm just expressing my love and where I wish to become better so that I can serve more. It all comes down to nature, family, and God. Family encompasses, for me, my community, Sacred Sons, and I consider all humans part of this big family.
Well, I will have a link in the show notes to Sacred Sons because it is such a meaningful and vibrant and welcoming community. That is, if you're a man. Devana has her own feminine circles.
Yeah, Sacred Sisters Circle. At some point, we're going to build to the union, the masculine and feminine, doing the work together. Yes. That's the vision.
Nice. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really loved our conversation, and I'm so grateful there are men like you showing our younger generation or older generation that to be a man does not have to be toxic, and boys can cry and men can feel feelings, and to turn that pain that you experience to be able to express it and not carry it into the next generation.
Yeah, it's time that men find forgiveness and permission to feel, and spaces where we feel safe enough to do the work of healing. It was an honor to be here today to talk to you and share. Thank you.
Well, you're very eloquent and clear, and also very open, which helps other people open. So that's beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. It's been an honor. Thank you so much.
Bye, Aubert.
Hey, have a good day.
This is Rachel Steinman. For more information or to contact me with any questions, comments, or guest ideas, please check out rightnowrachel.com. That's right with a W. Thank you so much for listening, subscribing, and sharing, dear family. And if you found value in what you've just heard, I would love and so appreciate a great review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, I wish you love, happiness, and good mental health.